Okay, seems we're going on to YouTube as well for a live stream. And it's nice to see some new faces here. Um, we're, this is a weekly, very basic Jungian psychology presentation. And it's intended basically for some of our subscribers or interested people, let's say, in China, where they can watch Zoom, but they cannot go back and see YouTube after the fact. And because of that situation, I decided to do a series for them on uh, on the very basics of Jungian psychology, and I'm doing that um, with the aid of this series, which is called Jung's Red Book for Our Time: Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. And here are a couple of my. And so, in part, I go slow in it. This is the 6th session, and we're let's see, we're on the 11th page of a 25-page essay. And we do have some folks coming in, much to my surprise. We have a lot of early risers, it seems. And because we have Dr. Stein coming at 1 p.m. today, U.S. Eastern time, we're going to have over 500, well, I would say about 600 people have now registered for that session. I have room for 500. Now, 2 weeks ago, we had Dr. Ann Belford-Ulanoff on, and I had 270 people registered for her. And on the Zoom call, only 80 showed up. About another 20 came in YouTube. And over 1,000 have watched the video of her session since then. So it was quite a fruitful session. And so I'm not expecting there to be a space problem this afternoon, but if you're interested in doing that, and it's not going to be 1 o'clock in the morning as it will be for Nick in Singapore, and you feel you can be here live, that will be a unique opportunity to meet and to talk with one of the leading Jungian analysts in the world today. Dr. Stein is an American currently stationed in Zurich. And so, hello, Vivian, and hello, all my, and hello to the other Vivian. She knows who she is. Nice to see you, Vivian. But let's, if you're willing, let's just go around the room quickly and tell me what your interests are. You don't have to come on to video if you don't want to, but you know, I'm curious with new people how they've heard about what we're doing. And Vivian, do you have any background you want to offer to us? If not, you know, you can be private.
Sure. Yeah, I teach psychology of religion, and I used to teach a course, but it's not now running at the moment, on Jung and the post-Jungian. So I've been studying Jung since I was about 16, so a long time.
Wow.
But I was very interested to see how you were using the text in order to teach the basic concepts. So yeah, so that's what drew me to this. But I heard about it because I'm a member of IAJS.
Okay, terrific. Well, you're right in the wheelhouse of my main interest in Jungian psychology, because unfortunately, I feel religion has been both used and misused. And in my case, I am descended from a long line of hard-headed Dutchmen who left Holland in 1625 on a leaky boat to get away from the 80 Years' War, where the Spanish kept coming up to Holland every summer to beat the Dutch back into Catholicism. And the Dutch said, no way, we're with Calvin. And so the result was that they became 5 of the first 150 European settlers of Manhattan Island. And but subsequently, in my own lifetime, my daughter got involved with fundamentalist missionaries in Kazan, Tatarstan, believe it or not. She had a fellowship there. And when she came back, we had a lovely dinner. And at the end of the dinner, talking about our global experience, I had her in Japan for 5 years, among other things, when she was growing up. And when we were finished with the dinner, she says, well, Dad, I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell. And at that moment, I dropped into hell, and it took me 10 years to work my way out. And it was only through the work of Dr. Jung that I was able to do that. But that night, on my drive home, I had a vision of Mephistopheles dropping into the seat next to me in my car. And this incident probably took 5 or 10 seconds, but when that happened, I cut the Faustian bargain, which was that he could have my immortal soul on my death, provided none of my daughters think that of me for the rest of my life. And he disappeared and hasn't come back. So it worked out.
Quite some experience.
Yeah. So Christian, yeah. So let's just go around the room quickly. Christian, where are you located?
Hello. From Malta.
From Malta. Okay,
Yes.
terrific. You were, I think I remember you from before. I suppose
yes,
that's true.
I've joined a number of your sessions, and I intend to join you with your talk with Mary Stein later on today as well. So
Right.
I'm just interested to follow what you have to say, and very grateful for this opportunity to listen and to continue to learn anything Jungian. So thank you for this.
Oh, terrific. Okay. If you're coming to the Mary Stein session this afternoon, please try to come 15 to 30 minutes early and just leave your computer on. You can go do some tea or something like that. But there are going to be 500, there are now about 600 fans of BTS, the Korean group, who have signed up for the session, and I have a limited space, only 500. So it's going to be quite a rock concert, to say the least. I don't know if you know anything about it, but BTS is a boy band from Korea, and they have 80 million fans around the world who they call themselves armies, which stands for, Nick, do you remember what it stands for? Adorable representatives of modern youth or something like that. That's what ARMY stands for. And so they, since BTS has done its last 2 albums based on Murray Stein's book, Jung's Map of the Soul, the BTS Army has learned a lot about Murray Stein, and so they're very interested in seeing him live. And so, Eleni, hello. Are you able to say anything to us? Guess not. Okay. Nick is, I'm just going to introduce Nick Chan. Nick is a regular subscriber of mine from Singapore, and we see each other 3 times a week probably. And there's an interesting session that we had in the Wisdom Path colloquia that you can find about Nick. Yuan, will you introduce yourself? You don't have to show yourself, but okay. Yoshihiko.
Hi, Skip. Yeah.
Nice
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm based in China.
Yeah.
And of course, I know the situation, international situation for China is a bit sensitive, but I guess our love for Jung and Jung's theory is the same. So
yes.
Nice meeting everyone here. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So Yagyu-san, konbanwa.
Yes, konbanwa. I'm Yoshihiko Yagyu from Japan.
Yes, nice to see you. It's great to have some Japanese guests because I'm watashi wa Edo ko desu.
Oh, you're pretty good in speaking Japanese.
Yeah, koko jidai watashi wa Kamakura ni sundeimashita.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, once I heard in your YouTube, you have visited Kyoto in several decades ago, right?
Oh, yes. So I started in Japan in 1962 at the age of 15.
Oh.
So nice to have you. So moving on, Susan, are you able to say anything?
Yes, Kyoto, I actually live in Nara. Nara is close to Kyoto.
Yes,
and,
yes.
Kyoto is one of the cradle of Japanese Jungian. I'm not a Jungian. I have been an resident for more than 3 decades.
Ah, terrific. Well, maybe you'll become a Jungian now. Once we get bitten by the bug, it's hard to get out of it. So
actually, I am a physician or in charge of public health. So Jungians, I try to make application Jungian thought to public health and in order to people health.
Terrific.
Health.
Yeah, that's terrific. Susan Benson, are you able to say anything? I guess not. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with my reading. I'm reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And this essay was edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. Thomas Arzt was a friend of mine who mentored me a bit, and he persuaded Murray to work on this project, which now has 4 volumes, and the 5th volume will be issued next April. And he unfortunately died, I think, of COVID, one of the first COVID deaths on Easter Sunday. And so I'm trying to pick up the reins from Thomas's legacy, and I'm reading from his essay, which is the first essay in the 4-volume series. There are 4 of these books. And so now there's about 70 essays, and they all address the Red Book from a different point of view. And so what I have said is that the Red Book is like an uncut diamond, and each of these Jungian analysts has now bared another facet. And so the Red Book is really sparkling through now. And So anyway, I'm on page 24 of this essay. What I'm doing, because we have members who don't have English as a first language, I'm going very slowly so that these ideas can be understood. So page 24, halfway down, Wolfgang Giedrich argues that the Red Book is to be read as Jung's answer to Nietzsche. Now, what I say in a very flippant kind of way is that Nietzsche declared that God is dead, and Jung in the next generation found the living God where he lives and how he goes about doing the work of the Godhead. And I've given a formal presentation on that last October called Finding the Living God, which you can find on the homepage of my YouTube channel so that you can hear my sort of summation of that after studying it for many years. I've been studying Jungian psychology now for 33 years. And so Nietzsche was simply declaring the fact that the Christian myth, the stories of Christian life, which are so well known around the world, had a lot of holes punched in it after the year 1500, after the beginning of the scientific method. And so people used to say God is up there and the devil's down there. But Galileo looked through his telescope and he didn't see God anywhere. And now we have telescopes that can see back to the Big Bang, and nobody's found God, at least not the God in heaven that that Christianity sold for 1500 years. And that isn't to say there is no God, and it isn't to say that there is no heaven, but it is to say that the stories, the narrative that appears in the Bible is a metaphorical narrative. It's not a rational physical world narrative. And Jung summed this up in a sentence in his book, Answer to Job, when in paragraph 752 of that book, he said, every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche. It is not a statement of the physis, which means the physical world. And so what the stories of the Bible represent is basically psychological development, human psychological development. And the reason the Christian calendar or any religious calendar is evergreen is because we are constantly changing. We have a new generation every year, and human beings are born as wild animals. We don't know anything when we're born from our mothers except instinct. And we have to learn how to be human beings. And we learn that from our parents. And so from 1500 going backward, all those years, human beings were able to learn those things through, learn the things they needed to do in order to be a moral and decent member of society by going to church every Sunday. But when Nietzsche finally summed up the fact after 400 years that those stories don't work anymore, they're not convincing anymore, then humanity fell into into a century of godlessness, and we had 280 million people killed by violence in the 20th century. And obviously that was quite awful. And so we need to find our way back to religion in one way or another. And of course, the traditional religions, all of them do have still what they had before. And so it is possible to do it through the traditional religions, but unfortunately for maybe young men and women, people like me of the mid 20th century, you know, I was always just confused by the stories in the church and then the stories in my science classes. And I'm saying, you know, what's this all about? And nobody would tell me anything about it. And so I've had to work it out over my lifetime. And so, so Dr. Arst's essay is a profound essay in telling us about that. And so that's why I'm reading it. And so I'm going to begin once again. I only got through one sentence, but this essay is very heavily layered. And it's really profound. So I'm going to read that sentence once again. Okay, so Wolfgang Dietrich argues that the Red Book is to be read as Jung's answer to Nietzsche. Like many of his generation, Jung tried to confront the implications of modernity head on. Here, by the way, one may be reminded of Heidegger's and Junger's disputation over the line, in which both, with respect to the question of nihilism, navigate in Nietzsche's way, but Jung did not see his solutions represented in Nietzsche's Übermensch. It was rather in the formulation of a new spirituality. The title of this solution is The Process of Individuation. Okay, so Jung's whole work, I didn't get into it until 2005. So I had already studied about Jung for quite a long time before I realized that almost all of his work is religion, the psychology of religion. And so if you understand that, then it opens up something entirely new. And as Thomas More, famous Jungian analyst, has said, we need to develop a religion of our own. Each one of us has to develop our own religion. Now, I heard recently, and maybe Vivian Crowley could confirm for me whether this is true, that there's actually a spectrum, and with religion on one end and spirituality on the other end. And so religion is the more structured way of addressing the unconscious. And it's been developed over thousands of years, of course, in every part of the world. And spirituality is getting to the same sorts of issues within the psyche, but it's not doing it in a very formal way. So, for example, do you have a comment on that, Vivian? I'm just curious about the spectrum between religion and
yeah, I mean, a way I often think of it is that religion has also social functions, where spirituality is about the individual experience of the divine in whatever way it comes to us. So I think we can have the individual and social oblique community dimension as well as a way of separating. It's possible to have a religion with very little spirituality, and spirituality without the structures of religion.
right. And so in many cities and towns in America, you would have no social life if you didn't go to church. And so regardless of what you believe about God and the hereafter and that sort of thing, if you didn't go to church, you couldn't be elected to be a alderman or a mayor. And because everybody goes to church and that's how their society works. And whereas spirituality can come in other ways. So the other extreme, which I sort of quip about, is there are yoga teachers in Nebraska. Okay, so Nebraska is a very very religiously oriented state with lots of Pentecostal and fundamentalist Christians in it. But if you go to the gym and take a class in yoga there, the yoga teachers have learned to hide religious teachings within the teachings of yoga. And so what my wife and I experienced when we started to take a Jung yoga class, we're both old, let's put it. and so we can't do much fancy exercise anymore. But we did take a yin yoga class, which is a very soft type of yoga exercise class. And what we observed in that class is that especially women were coming to these sessions even at the usual traditional church time of 11 a.m. on a Sunday. And the yoga teachers were basically teaching fundamental Hinduism, and which was a great surprise to me. And or I guess it wasn't a great surprise, but many people, as a result of that fact, and that's true probably worldwide, but certainly all the yoga most of the yoga that's taught in the United States is taught in gymnasiums or, public gyms, where there are a lot of women who've learned how to teach some of the basic positions, and so they can teach you something, and you get a spiritual lift out of it. You definitely do. And but I'm not sure how many of them realize that they're actually teaching Hindu meditation techniques. And what many people think, and I have a pastor friend who thinks this, is that that's all yoga is a kind of gym exercise. But yoga is actually a very disciplined spiritual path. And I've had a numinous experience dealing with that over the last 4 months, thanks to a Jungian analyst named Ashok Bedi, who mentioned the Bhagavad Gita in connection with his discussion with us. And I've been a Asia-oriented scholar all of my life. Since I was 15, I lived in an ancient capital of Japan for 3 years when I was in high school, Kamakura. I lived 1 mile from Kamakura Daibutsu, for the great Buddha of Kamakura, which was built in around 1253, or begun about then. And so I visited that site many times. And, when I was 15, I was saying, oh, gee, what is this guy doing? What is this all about? And it turned out that my wife also had experiences in Japan, and she got enamored with Tibetan Buddhism. So she and I have been studying Tibetan Buddhism for 25 years, but over the years, I started to learn about Buddhism, and so I knew something about it before my wife got involved with Tibetan Buddhism, and she's now an all but ordained Tibetan Buddhist teacher. She's done a 3-year retreat in Tibetan Buddhism on her own path. And my path has been through Jungian psychology. So we've been paralleling in our spirituality, let's say. But I've sort of tended back toward traditional religions, although not exclusively toward Christianity. But, you know, because my upbringing was Christian, I tend to think about those things a lot. And so, but what Thomas More said is that each of us must develop our own spiritual path in order to have a satisfactory life. And so that's what this next sentence is, which is the title of this solution is the process of individuation. Now, this is an idea. Individuation is an idea that is sort of at the center point of Jungian psychology. And it doesn't mean being an individual. It doesn't mean just being crazy and, okay, there's crazy Joe over there and he's doing such and such and so on. That also can be acting out. And this is much more. This is what the Oracle of Delphi had emblazoned in the door through which you came when you went to see the Oracle of Delphi, which is know thyself. And it's actually the motto of my college as well, know thyself. And what it means is that you need to become more and more conscious as you're a human being. And the first half of life is the so-called hero's journey. And that's a journey of coming from a wild animal at birth that doesn't know anything to a mature human being making a contribution in your society. And that process is depicted in films all of the time. The most famous example where you can find some psychological discussions about it is Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker is he's an orphan. He doesn't really know anything about the world and the universe in his case. And he goes through a series of trials of education, and different things happen to him, some of them awful. But at the end of the movie, he is going into this huge auditorium, and everybody is cheering, and he's awarded a medal. And so that's the end of the first Star Wars movie, which was actually episode 4 of that series. But the same sort of plot happens in all 9 of the Star Wars movies. But for Luke Skywalker, that moment at the end of episode 4, the first movie, is him reaching the pinnacle of the hero's journey. In other words, he's now a leader in his community. Everybody looks up to him. And oh, by the way, he's 25 years old. So now what? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And that's what we have to learn. That's what individuation is about. And so Dr. Jung was not very interested in younger people because he wasn't very interested in forming people. He was interested in taking people who had been formed and who had been suffered some trauma. We sometimes call it the midlife crisis, where you say, okay, I've raised 3 kids, or I'm in the midst of raising 3 kids, and I've got a house, I've got a spouse, and I've got a car or 2. And so now what? What's it all about? And if you can't find something that is driving you, then you're in trouble, in spiritual trouble and psychological trouble for the rest of your life. And it's where people become dependent upon alcohol or drugs, for example. And so one really needs to find what turns them on and guides them in the movement forward of their lives. And so, people talk to me and they say, wow, Skip, you've had 9 lives. And truly I have, because I've had a very international life, which has involved living in Japan for 8 years total. And it's involved the military, it's involved the practice of law, and so on. And, those all were well and good, but they weren't really me. And so I've also been an artist too. But all of those experiences were things that taught me about that part of life. And so when I was on active duty in the Marine Corps, and I served 23 years in the US Marines, I learned about the logos, about form and structure and so on. And every young man, especially young men, need structure in their lives. They want people to tell them what to do, and they're happy to try to do it. And so young Marines would come to me and they would say, just tell me what to do, sir. I don't want to have to deal with the politics, but just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll go over that hill and do whatever you say to do. Well, that's all well and good until you get into combat. And then there's another thing that happens, and I'll just show you everything I have to say about the Vietnam War. This is a self-portrait I did in about the year 2000, but it was based on a photograph that was taken of me after a combat experience in Vietnam. And everything I have to say about the Vietnam War is contained in the white of my left eye. I don't want to get into art per se and how I do art, but there were 2 photographs. There was one of me very cocky at the beginning of this operation, and there was this photograph, which was at the end of the operation. And I was planning to do 2 paintings, one of me before and one of me after, but I couldn't do it. I started with the second painting first. I don't remember why, or if I knew at the time. So I did this painting, and then I realized that I didn't have anything more to say about Vietnam and about my experience in the Marine Corps. So I just stopped. Now, in fairness, I did continue to do, to stay in the Marine Corps. And I did that for another 20 years after my Vietnam experience. But I was in the reserve, and but I know something about that very rigid, formal, logos-oriented way of being in the world. And so, but then I had to learn something else. And so I again went to something that was very logically oriented, which is the law. And I loved going to law school very much. But what I found out when I got out into practice was I really detest the practice of law. And, and I found myself always dealing with other people's hardships. And that wasn't very suitable for me in my life. And so I did it for 5 years. And meanwhile, after 3 years, I had figured out that I really wanted to be in business, or I thought I did, and I did. And so I went to business school and got an MBA. And while I was practicing law, and while I was serving as the company commander of the local reserve unit, and while I was teaching business law, so I had 4 jobs at one point. And I didn't know which way I was going, honestly. When I was about 30 years old, I had these 4 jobs. And I literally drove out of the reserve center one day and pulled the car over to the side. And I just didn't know where I was going anymore. And I had to pull the car aside, and I had to just sit there and meditate for about 10 minutes to let my brain reboot, because I had so many things going on. And so then you have to face your dark side. And I'm not going to go into the shadow in great detail today, but one of the things that you have to do is face the dark side. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing over the coming year in my Monday group is to do a very detailed teaching on the Tarot. And last night we had a presentation by Melissa Townsend, who is a professional psychic. She's very good. And I actually, about 16 days ago, I took a professional reading from Melissa. And yeah, I can tell you it was profound. Okay. And so she was very good. And last night she came on our wisdom group, and we had a discussion of the Tarot. Now, I've been involved in the Tarot for 25 years in a very surprising way, which is that I was doing business in India. I've made 44 trips to India since 1994, and I created a business there that became a public company. At one point, we had a 1 megabit circuit, 7 by 24 by 365 to Chennai from my office here in Annapolis, Maryland. And so what that means is that it's like running an airline where you have to fill the seats, because you have bandwidth that's dedicated to you. And in this case, this bandwidth was costing $50,000 per month to run that circuit. And so I had to fill up that bandwidth, and I did it with 6 different businesses. But one of those businesses was I created the first commercial call center in the Republic of India in 1994. And I needed to fill that bandwidth. And so one of the things we decided to do was to offer 900 number Tarot readings in the United States. So you could call up on the telephone to this 900 number, and my Indian staff would read the Tarot for you. And so maybe you pay $5 or $10 on your telephone bill, and you'd be speaking to this young Indian gentleman who was at 2 o'clock in the morning, his time, was reading the Tarot for you. But how does one do that? Well, We're problem-solving creatures, and obviously, when I faced that issue. Okay, so how does one create a call center that's doing the tarot in India? So one fine day I flew into Madras knowing nothing about the tarot, literally nothing. And I took a 5-hour class on the tarot from a very gifted tarot reader, and just him and me, a private lesson. And the next day we started to teach 40 Indian men how to do the tarot together. And we did it, unbelievable as that may seem. And so in the process, I learned how divination works, and particularly the tarot. So in the coming year, I'm going to be running a detailed lesson on the tarot every week on Monday night at 8 p.m. US Eastern Time, with doing one card a week. And so that means that tomorrow I will be running the first of these classes on the Empress card, which is the Empress represents mother, among other things, in the tarot deck. And so I will be spending 2 hours talking about the archetype of mother. Okay, and keeping in mind in Jungian psychology, one of the things that Dr. Jung rediscovered from Platonic times was the concept of archetype. And so the tarot deck, the major arcana of the tarot deck, are 22 of the main archetypal people and events that one experiences in life. And so each of them represents an archetypal energy in the universe. And so the result of that is that that if you understand these 22 archetypes, you're going to understand yourself and your world better. And so that's why this teaching will take place over the coming year. So the first 22 weeks of it, I will be doing the major arcana, and I haven't decided yet how to deal with the minor arcana yet. There are 56 cards in the minor arcana, which are the suits, and they represent archetypal stories in 4 different areas, things that happen typically to many people. And so the idea is, I don't want to teach divination. I've actually done that, and I've put 18 videos on this YouTube channel that teach divination with the tarot as I was taught to teach it. And that's already in the can, and you can find it on the homepage of this YouTube channel. But what I want to do is I want to teach the tarot as a roadmap for life. These are the main things that people run into in their lifetime. And so that when you find yourself in chaos, you can go back, you can try to take yourself out of the chaos and just analyze, okay, where am I? What's this that's happening to me? And what are the other things? How could I alter my life to change it and make it better? And I believe that we can do that with the tarot. And so that's what I'm going to be offering over the coming year. And that will be a series that will be on the YouTube channel for playback. But it's about figuring yourself out, knowing yourself, and that's what individuation is about. And so what I'm planning to do with the Empress tomorrow, everybody's got a mother, everybody's got good and bad experiences with mother probably. And so we're going to talk about everyone's experiences with mother. And so that will be at at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. So for Yoshihiko-san, it will be at 9 a.m. Tuesday, Japan time. And so you'd all be welcome to join us if you wish. And it might be a little bit late for folks in Europe. I apologize for the timing, but I can't do everything at a time that's convenient to everyone. So the individuation process then is a process, and it's a fairly complicated process that we undergo throughout our lives. We're all individuating all of the time, right up to the day of our death. And we either know about it and therefore know how to make adjustments in our lives to make ourselves happier with our lives, or we don't, in which case we still have individuation, but instead of walking into the end of our lives, walking upright, we're dragged along by fate. People call it fate. That's what Dr. Jung basically said. All right, so reading on, I've completed 8 lines of this essay. So now he's quoting Wolfgang Giedrich, I guess, and he says, the overall theme of the book is how Jung regains his soul and overcomes the contemporary malaise of spiritual alienation. This is ultimately achieved through enabling the rebirth of a new image of God in his soul and developing a new worldview in the form of psychological and theological cosmology. Liber Novus presents the prototype of Jung's conception of the individuation process, which he held to be the universal form of individual psychological development. Liber Novus itself can be understood on one hand as depicting Jung's individuation process, and on the other hand, as his elaboration of this concept as a general psychological schema. Now, so basically, Edward Edinger, if you don't know, if you find Jung difficult to get into, you can always go to Edward Edinger's books. He wrote 17 books, and he actually wrote books that explained his way through some of Jung's most complicated work. Particularly helpful is the Ion lectures and the Mysterium lectures, which are about 2 of Jung's books. One is Ion, which is researches into the phenomenology of the self, and the other is Mysterium Conjunctionis, which is about, basically it's about alchemy, but it's about how our lives really work. Because, you know, just think of it, alchemy is not about making gold. It's about making psychological gold. It's not about making the element AU. And so how do we turn our lives and make our lives golden is really the question, and that's a psychological question. And so alchemy developed in parallel with the Christian religion in Western Europe from the 3rd century. And a very simple way to think of it is a theorem which was developed by a 3rd century alchemist, a woman named Maria Prophetessa, the prophet Maria, if you will. And her formula was 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and the 3rd becomes four, which becomes one again. And so if you understand how that works, you can really apply it to all parts of your life. So let us take ourselves as individual. We are one. And then we usually find a mate or spouse. And so we have become two. We have become a couple. And our lives are somewhat altered by the fact that we are together. And as Dr. Jung said, when two people meet, both are transformed. And so when you become a couple, even when you have a girlfriend when you're young, you become a different person when you're interacting with that person, and you learn to live in a different way. And of course, when you're living together with a spouse before you've had children, you have to learn the give and take of being together. And then magic happens, and you have a child, and that child becomes the third thing. And so one way of thinking of that is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So you are the thesis, your spouse is the antithesis, the opposite in many ways, and together you create a child, which is the synthesis of both of you. And so that's the third thing. But that third thing now is a family. And so that's the fourth thing. And so you become a family, and that's back to one again. Now it's one thing, it's the family, and you've moved one level up in consciousness because you've become something different at each stage. You were first, it was you, then it was you and your spouse, that's one stage. Then it's you and your spouse and your child, that's another stage. And now you're a family, that's a new thing. And so now that family is a thesis, and the family may have an antithesis, which is a new child. Okay, so now you have a second child, and that second child has to find a way to become part of the family, because you had the family and everybody was good about that. And then this new person is born into it, and that new person has effects on your life. And so that child is the antithesis. And I've just been seeing it with my grandchildren, because I have 10, but the youngest group has a pair of twins who are now 3 years old. And in January, they had a baby sister born. And so they're not too sure about this baby sister, whether they're very happy about her. And it's just very interesting to see the expressions on their faces when they're looking at this child. And I know that my older granddaughter, I've seen images of her where she's looking very devious as she's looking at this young child. And so she's very doubtful about what that's going to be. And, gradually the children, the twins have gotten used to her, and so they accept her in. And so then she becomes part of the family too, but then she's the third. So it's the family, then the thesis, the antithesis is the new child, the synthesis is bringing that new child into the family. And so now you have a different family. And so you've gone up again, another level of consciousness and another level of awareness. And And so that's psychological alchemy in its simplest form. And that's actually happening in your life all the time. And that's what Dr. Jung was talking about when he was talking about alchemy. And so the individuation process is constantly adding to your consciousness. So we can see in the United States people who haven't developed, who want things my way and no other way. We see that very blatantly in the coronavirus crisis, where some people are refusing to do their duty for the community, so they're refusing to wear a mask, and so that's that's behavior like a very selfish child. And whereas more people who are more psychologically developed typically will see the value of community, because we really need community to live our lives successfully. We can't just say it's my way and no other way, because we can't live a very broad life. Now, in my case, because I've lived 10 years overseas, including a couple of years in India and at least 6 months in Saudi Arabia, I have seen the human species in all kinds of configurations. And I can vouch for the fact that we're very much alike around the world, but we have different stages of development. And so if I go to India, I see the 12th century overlaid over the 21st century very regularly. I mean, they're very different categories of development within the Indian nation, and we see it in the United States very clearly, be in our political arena, and so what Dr. Edinger pointed out then is that religion has gone or is constantly going through several stages of development. Okay, the first stage was the stage of the law. And so that can be depicted by the example of Moses coming off Mount Sinai with the tablets of God and the law on those tablets called the Ten Commandments. And basically those were fundamental laws to have peace and to allow for civilization, because as long as humans were wild animals, we couldn't live in community. And so, for example, in great apes, you often see that if you go to a zoo and see great apes, what you will see is one alpha male, and that alpha male will have many females around him grooming him. And the other males who aren't as strong are in the periphery, out doing other things because they don't have access to the females. But obviously, if you're going to have civilization, you have to stop fighting over who's going to have a spouse. So, so the idea of marriage was, developed and worked out in different ways, but in very simply the very common way of having a marriage ceremony and so on. And then by and large, the community will accept that marriage. Obviously, there are exceptions in the form of love affairs and that sort of thing. But without having the ability to cool our jets, cool our passions, and just live with one person of the opposite sex, let's say, or live with one partner, you'd have people at everyone's throats all the time. And that is what happens in great ape communities and other communities where there's a constant warfare over creatures of the opposite sex. And so one of the innovations of humanity was to develop the law as a psychological tool which would allow for civilization. Thou shalt not commit adultery is one of the 10 commandments. And another is thou shalt not kill. Well, the ugly truth is that we kill all the time. You cannot go to the grocery store without killing something, because all life lives on other life. And so everything that we eat was once alive. And we are, we are obliged by life itself to kill other beings, whether it's animal or vegetable. And so the only unique thing about a vegetarian is that they've never heard a tomato scream. But the reality is that tomatoes have lived their lives, and they live their life for a purpose. They live to fruition, but then we eat them and they become part of our life. They become a human being. But if you think about it, everything that you purchase at the grocery store was once alive, okay? And so when we have this thou shalt not kill commandment, well, okay, that's good in your own community, but there's been warfare since there's been creatures of any kind, and so we human beings also partake in that, and we partake in human sacrifice. We just don't call it that anymore. We call it going to war or something like that. But the reality is that we do it. And but the idea of thou shalt not kill, it means in the case of 3,500-year-old humanity, it means we're not going to kill one another within our own community, okay, at the very basic level. Okay, so religion developed according to the law in all places, and we have Muhammad, peace be upon him, the prophet, who set down the law in the Quran for the Muslim community. And there are many other examples. As I've learned newly in the last 6 months, the Bhagavad Gita is a story that was passed down in India, and reputedly it's 5,000 years old. It's at least that, but it was only written down 2,000 years ago. But that basically, as my Indian partner has told me recently, is the Bhagavad Gita represents the archetype of the humble warrior. Since we've read 15 discourses of the Bhagavad Gita into the YouTube channel now, I can concur with that. I know that that's right. And so in every society, there have been these traditions of knowing the parameters of life. So then the second stage is the stage of belief. Now, this is the stage that's represented by Jesus Christ in tradition, in the Christian tradition. And what it says is that there is another world, okay, that is this one. Okay, we live in two worlds, and they're both this one. And what we have to understand is that our psyche is another universe. As Dr. Jung found in his long study, the psyche is every bit as big of a universe as the universe that we see in our physical lives. And it's highly complex, way more complex than just rocks banging into one another out in space. And so we needed a way to address that world, that psychic world. Now, for early Iron Age men and women around the birth of Christ, that time, there wasn't a very good way of referring to it. And Jesus Christ had probably learned his spiritual approach in India or possibly in Iran. He disappeared from age 12 to age 30. And during that time, he was obviously learning something. And there are traditions in India that he had been at certain monasteries in India that still exist. And certainly after his death, his apostles spread to the world. And so in Chennai, India, is the Basilica of St. Thomas. And so doubting Thomas after Christ's death ended up finding his way to India, where he began to teach. And by tradition, some of his artifacts, his relics, are in that Basilica of St. Thomas in Chennai. So we were communicating a lot over thousands of years across the world. And Jesus somehow got the learning of this other world, okay? And he could only explain it in the context of something, let's call it extraterrestrial, or a higher plane of being. And so people started to get the idea by belief that God is up there and hell is down there. And certainly if you go to anything that approaches the center of the earth, like a volcano, you'll know that there's fire and brimstone there. So it did comport with reality in many ways. And certainly when people are faced with a haboob, which is a dust storm in the Middle East, or a tornado, or a tsunami, then you can feel that this is an act of God, that's because it's way beyond your control and understanding. And so people got the idea of God being something outside ourselves, supernatural, if you will. But what Dr. Jung came and unpacked for us, okay, because he dedicated 50 years of writing to unpacking for us basically the Christian tradition, so that we can see that God is not supernatural. It's not a woo-woo magical thing. God is supranatural. So that supra means within. So God is within each of us. The traditions of religion were able to teach that and evolve a teaching that did certain things over the first 1,500 years of the Christian tradition by belief. People would just believe it, and many people do. And even today, many Christians, I would probably say a majority of Christians, just have a belief that there is a God out there that we can touch in the physical world. But what Edinger points out to us is that because Galileo looked through a telescope, and then the scientific method over 500 years has said, well, that's not true, and that's not true, and this is not true. And the result of that has been a kind of nihilism has developed in humanity. But it's sort of wrong-headed. And so we need to find our way out of that. And that way is the third approach to religion, which is psychology. And this is what Dr. Jung was pointing out. So he wasn't intending to create a new religion. And in fact, creating a new religion by any human being would be entirely impossible. I actually have a image that I could show you of that and show you why it's not possible. Let's see if this is, I just have to find the right slide. But, oh, here it is. Okay, that's nice. It's slide 30. Okay, so I gave this talk last October called Finding the Living God. And one of the images in this talk is this image. And so what this image is a representation that was done in the 1580s, so the 16th century, where an artist attempted to just describe what the apostles were. And so this is, on the left is the apostle John, and on the right is the apostle Luke. And so what he attempted to do was to include visually everything that had been attributed to these apostles. And there are many other wild and woolly images like this from that book. Let's see, it's called the Hexaticon or something like that, by Sebastian Brandt in 1502, I think. Anyway, so Sebastian Brandt tried to differentiate the different things that these two apostles were, and he did many others. And obviously it becomes a mishmash. So if we were to today create a Wikipedia page, we're saying that we're going to create a new religion, this is the sort of thing we would get in the end, because everybody has a different idea of what morality should be, what the rules should be, and everybody has a different idea of who's in charge in heaven and all sorts of things. Everybody has their own idea. You've been hearing some of mine today. But the point is that a good religion, a real religion, has to evolve over centuries, and it has to evolve by consensus, by human consensus. And so all the major religions have evolved in that way, and they were basically systems of psychotherapy. So I have another slide here that covers that, because Dr. Jung did speak to this point. And so he said, for thousands of years, the mind of man has worried about the sick soul, perhaps even earlier than it did about the sick body. The propitiation of gods, the perils of the soul and its salvation. These are not yesterday's problems. Religions are, and I added the two words naturally evolved, psychotherapeutic systems in the truest sense of the word and on the grandest scale. They express the whole range of the psychic problem in mighty images. They are the avowal and recognition of the soul, and at the same time, the revelation of the soul's nature. And that's from Civilization in Transition, volume 10 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, paragraph 367. So religions were naturally evolved. And so some people like to accuse Dr. Jung of trying to create a new religion. And he wasn't doing that at all, because he knew that we couldn't just patch together a new religion that everybody could buy in on and make it work. We needed to evolve something. And so there's a famous story here, which I'll skip ahead to because it's mentioned here in this essay, but later. But since I'm talking about it now and it bears repeating, let me skip ahead to it. So Max Zeller was a contemporary of Dr. Jung's, and he took a dream to Dr. Jung, and he told this dream that came out of Zeller's head. And here's the quote about the dream. A temple of vast dimensions was in the process of being built. As far as I could see ahead, behind, right, and left, there were incredible numbers of people building on gigantic pillars. I too was building on a pillar. The whole building process was in its very first beginnings, but the foundation was already there. The rest of the building was starting to go up, and I and many others were working on it, unquote. Jung said, yes, you know, that is the temple we all build on. We don't know the people because, believe me, they build in China and in India and in Russia and all over the world. That is the new religion. You know how long it will take until it is built, I said. How should I know? Do you know? He said, I know. I asked, how long will it take? He said, about 600 years. Where do you know this from? I asked. He said, from dreams and from other people's dreams and from my own. This new religion will come together as far as we can see. And so Dr. Jung's point here in that passage is basically that a new religion has to evolve, and it's going to be different from anything else, but it won't be put together on a Wikipedia page. It has to evolve from the human species itself. And we are only at the beginnings of that. So we're each building our own pillar of how that will be, and working on it, one of the pillars. And so like the cathedral builders in Europe in the early period after the year 1000, people who built Chartres and Notre Dame and those cathedrals, they too were building on a religion, and most of them never saw the result, or many of them never saw the result, because by tradition it takes 100 years or 3 generations at least to build a cathedral. And so people built on it, but they didn't know what they were building toward. And I had the experience last year of, or I guess maybe it was earlier this year. I've lost track. My days are running together in quarantine. But anyway, when Notre Dame burned, and I'm not a Catholic, but I turned on the television set that afternoon and saw Notre Dame burning, and I was overcome with emotion. I started to weep, and I couldn't control that weeping, and I didn't know what I was weeping about. And then on reflection over the next week, it came to me that nothing has been destroyed. Nothing so important has been destroyed, because the physical building and the artwork can be replaced, and it is a contribution to our economy and society to rebuild Notre Dame. And but nothing essential was lost when Notre Dame burned, because we carry it within us. We're the temple. We're the cathedral. And so that pile of bricks and mortar and lovely works of art is only a representation of what we really carry within ourselves. And as you see, it's quite numinous for me even now, that I can't even speak about it without getting emotional. But the point is that which is our soul, and that which is within us, is the important thing. It isn't bricks and mortar. It's not lovely works of art. All those can be replaced, and so, but it's our soul that can't be replaced. So, okay, reading on. Along with Jung's narrative of individuation, many philosophical, theological, and psychological questions concerning topics such as God, knowledge, language, logic, meaning, chaos, death, and evil are raised in the Red Book. Several distinct themes and concepts circumscribe Jung's attempt at conceiving a new cosmology, among others. And there's a colon here, and he goes on for the next 10 pages with various categories of other things. But really, this whole series of now 4 volumes and 70 essays is an elaboration of what the Red Book is. So let me share with you. If you don't know, I keep my Red Book at my elbow, and this is the Red Book. And as you can see, it's quite a large document. It's been translated into many languages. I think that it's translated into Japanese. Wait a minute. Okay, so I have to get the right there. You can get a sense of it. It weighs 22 pounds, and it contains just remarkable images, and I have those on JPEG, so I can share one of the images for you in case you haven't seen it. For any of you that are not familiar with the Red Book, let me just bring one up just for an example. Okay, so here's an example. These are paintings that Dr. Jung himself did over a 16-year period. And what you see here is we all live in a leaky boat. Okay, our life is a boat that's floating on the unconscious, and in the seas of the unconscious, there are creatures who would gladly eat us if they had a chance. And so this is a symbolic example. And so today in the climate crisis, finally, we see that we all live on a leaky boat. We call it the Earth. And it's, so you could think of this boat and this orb here as the Earth, and everything around it is the chaos that's around us in the universe. And we as a human species are going to have to figure out a way to live together and to keep our leaky boat afloat in the sea of the universe, or we're going to be in serious trouble. And so Dr. Jung gave us that teaching long ago, and among many others. I mean, the Red Book is just filled with dynamic and very precious images. And we will be having a presentation at 2:30 p.m. on the 2:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time on the 16th of August, so 1 week from today, with Dr. Jill Malik, who is the author of another book that's almost as big as the Red Book, called The Red Book Hours, in which she describes Dr. Jung's artistic process in very great degree. And I recently acquired that book from my own library, and it's just a remarkable book. And so next Sunday, she is going to be giving us the presentation that she made, the PowerPoint presentation that she made to the Jung family in order to be given permission to research into Dr. Jung's artistic methods. And it's going to be a truly profound session. And we'll see how one Jungian analyst actually approached this. And I just mentioned to Yoshihiko that I think the current president of the Jungian world, the International Association of Jungian Psychologists, is Japanese. Let me just see if I can find his article here. Anyway, it's not in that.
I'm not a member of IAAP nor ISAP.
But you're. Go ahead.
But tonight, the story of your experience in Vietnam reached me deeply. Vietnam was, as well as World War II and Korean Civil War, are in the neglected state.
Yes.
But once a German philosopher, Nietzsche, described that war is training for freedom. For what freedom? But after Vietnam period, era, in the US, especially in the West Coast, the counterculture movement occurs,
Yes.
I hear. And August 9th, in 1994, the Mr. Jerry Garcia, the leader and the guitarist of the US rock band Grateful Dead, died at the end of at the age of 53.
Mm-hmm.
And former President Clinton attended his funeral. It is a kind of, I think, the beginning of the state of albedo. After albedo, the rubedo state will occur.
Yes.
And we human beings must be integrated into the universe system, as you described, as Dr. Jung described. It's at that time, world peace will begin. I
Yes.
think.
Yes. And, you know, I've had a lot of experiences over my lifetime with how other religions have affected me. And this will be of interest, especially to you, Yagu-san, that I lived in Kamakura, as I said, and I went to high school in Yokohama. And so the result of that fact was that during my high school years, I would take a bus run by the US Navy from Kamakura to my high school. But after school, I couldn't take a bus. And so I had to take a train from Yokohama. And I had to take a bus or a streetcar to Yokohama Eki. And then from Yokohama Eki on the Yokosuka-sen to Kamakura. And one of the stops on the Yokosuka-sen is a city called Ofuna. And this statue is in Ofuna. And this is Ofuna Kanon. In Chinese, it would be Kuan Yin. And Kuan Yin, pardon?
Ofune Kannonji.
Kanonji, yeah.
Yeah.
Ofuna Kanonji.
Kannonji is a feminine great Buddha, image of Buddha.
Right, okay. So we would call this, we did call this in my high school days, the goddess of mercy. And so I would see this every day in my life when I was in high school. And it soothed me. It made me comfortable with my life and comfortable with the setting in which I was living, because mind you, I moved to Japan in January of 1962. So it was only 17 years after the war. And I had many experiences with this statue. And one of them, on one occasion, I had gone to a party in Yokohama late at night. And I went to Yokohama Station, and I didn't realize that other train lines could come to the platform where I was to catch my train. And so unconsciously, late at night, about 11:30 at night, I got on what I thought to be the last train, and I got on the wrong train line. I got on the Tokaido-sen instead of the Yokosuka-sen. And the Tokaido-sen was at that time, it was before the bullet train, so it was the main line between Tokyo and Kyoto and Nara and Yokohama, or I'm sorry, Osaka. And the rest of Japan, actually, it was the main line. And so I got in this train, and it started out a little bit oddly because it didn't stop at Hodogaya, which I was used to, and it didn't stop at Totska, but it did stop at Ofuna. So I was relieved that this was the same statue that I saw every night on my way home, and I was quite relieved. So I stayed on the train, and it didn't stop again until I was in Heratska, which was about an hour ride and something like 60 miles from my home. And I arrived in Heratska at about, it was close to 2 o'clock in the morning by the time I got there, and it was the last train of the day. And by that time I knew that I was in trouble because I had taken the wrong train, and I knew I wasn't close to my home. And mind you, I was 15 years old. And at Heratska, the train had only one light bulb on the platform. It was a different time in Japan, obviously, at that time. And so I got off the train, and there was one train man on the platform, and I made arm signals, and I said, I want to go to Kamakura. And he says, no, Owari. Okay, it means finished. He was finished for the day. And he walked down this platform, and he left. And so here I am in a strange country that my country had been at war with only 17 years.
I understand how meaningful was your experience at that time.
Yeah. So the experience went on. A taxi driver came by the platform looking for a last fare, and I flagged him down, and he clearly, it was quite dark, and he didn't realize I was an American. And so I got in the taxi, and I said, I want to go to Kamakura. And he sort of shook his head, but I said, yeah, Kamakura. And so he drives, and he drove for 2 hours along the coast road past Enoshima. So I knew he was going in the right direction because I knew Enoshima by that time. And I arrived in Kamakura at 4:30 in the morning. Thanks to that taxi driver. And the bill for the taxi that night was 1,350 yen. It's a time when the dollar was 360 yen to the dollar. It was a fixed price. And we woke my father up. I had no money. And my father and mother had been out at a Japanese restaurant late at night and had spent all their yen. So all they had was this monopoly money that we used to use on the American bases called military payment certificates, which was not allowed to give to Japanese. But so my father gave this taxi driver 400 yen, a carton of cigarettes, and $5 bill in military payment certificates. And that's how he paid this taxi driver at 4:30. But that's what I knew, that as between Japan and the US, everything was going to be okay. I didn't know that until that point. And then,
your experience bridges both countries.
Yeah. So then a year and a half later, President Kennedy was killed.
Oh,
And
in Dallas.
yeah, in Dallas. But I was still in Kamakura at that time. And it happened to be the day of my senior dinner, which didn't take place, of course, but I had gone into Yokohama to see some of my friends after I had heard the news from my father. And I was really overwhelmed by the fact that many people on the train were reading the newspaper, and there was a photograph of the president on the newspaper, and I saw many Japanese weeping, and so I started to understand from then how small our leaky lifeboat is when I saw that the Japanese people would be weeping for the death of an American president. And so anyway, just since we're here and I have it handy, I'll also show the great Buddha of Kamakura, which is the image that I saw many times in my high school years and throughout my life. I've gone back to the great Buddha many times. So just to remind folks who might not know something about what we're talking about, this is the great Buddha of Kamakura. It's made of bronze, and it is 43 feet tall. And it has been there. It was originally in a temple, but in around 1495, the temple was swept away in a tsunami. And so think of this. This is about the same time that Columbus discovered America. This Buddhist statue had already been sitting there for two and a half centuries at that point, and the temple was swept away by the tsunami, and the great Buddhist statue is at least 200 feet above sea level, and so for that tsunami to sweep that temple away, it must have been quite an awful tsunami on that occasion. But anyway, the great Buddha has been sitting there ever since, out in the open. And so, just for those of you who are not familiar with that part of the world, I'll just share a personal experience.
Great image of Buddha is a kind of a symbol of the self,
yes,
of the center of your experience. And in Japan, it is constellated as a symbol, as a center of the self of your experience,
right.
I think.
Yeah, you're quite right. And so the gentleman's name is Toshio Kawai, who wrote in volume 3 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time.
I know him well, but
do you?
he doesn't me little.
Oh, I see. Okay. So let's see now. I'm just going to read one more brief paragraph for today. And so you see what my problem is getting through this essay. I've actually read just over a page of it. But so the first thing that Dr. Arzt talks about is finding the soul. And so I'll just mention that. So finding the soul. At the beginning of his self-experiment, Jung is instructed by the spirit of the depths to turn away from the spirit of this time, which represents the scientific materialistic worldview, and follow the spirit of the depths, which, as the ruler of the depths of world affairs from time immemorial and for all the futures, possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with the generations. And so when we talk about the spirit of the depths, we're talking about the self. In Jungian psychology, it's referred to as the spirit of the depths, the self, the God image, or the greater personality. And as Dr. Yoshihiko has been telling us, the great Buddha is actually looking inward toward the spirit of the depths, the self, and that's what Buddhist meditation is all about, is finding your inner self. And so going on here, the soul should not be considered as an object of science, an object of a dead system or a dead formula, but rather as a living and self-existing being. And so that's what I posit that I have found, and how I could give a talk called Finding the Living God, because that God image is within all of us in one way or another. And so I was speaking about my experiences in that. The path to the soul is difficult and fraught with danger, for the signposts have fallen. Unblazed trails lie before us. Each may go his own way. So in other words, the signposts which the great religions represented over many centuries have in many ways fallen away. And Jungian analyst James Hollis said in 1500, God fell off the roof of the cathedral and into the psyche of man. And so that's where we have to find it. So further, my friends, it is wise to nourish the soul, otherwise you will breed dragons and devils in your heart. The Red Book documents Jung's journey to the rediscovery of his lost soul, as well as his method of active imagination used to enter the dialogue with what he discovers. And so what I would also mention is that I had an experience like Dr. Jung's experience with the Red Book, which emerged as a novel in 1993. And it is called Mako, Memoirs of a Woman. I wrote it in a pen name. And it really, it relates to, I say that it's the autobiography of my anima from 1962 to 1993. And I really didn't know what to do with this novel. It contains some very intense parts. Mako is the story of the first woman prime minister of Japan. And it is, of course, there's never been a woman prime minister of Japan, although there may be sometime soon, I suppose, but there's never been a woman president of the United States either, but that can happen soon too. And so I wrote this novel entitled Mako, Memoirs of a Woman, which expresses a lot of things that were going on in my deep unconscious for 33 years. And it happened to me, it was an 8-month process for me. And I didn't have the advantage that Dr. Jung had of being a psychiatrist when it was happening to me. So I didn't know what was happening to me when this novel popped out. And it is an adult novel, so you shouldn't go looking for it unless you're prepared for some I'm going to say very delicately erotica, but it's a bit more than that in some parts. And it may not be popular among Japanese men, I must say, because it had its origins. It had its origins in the fact that I was looking for what I wanted to do in life when, in 1992, when Norman Schwarzkopf came back from the first Gulf War and wanted to have a war parade in Washington. And even though I'm a career military man and lifelong military person, I don't believe in glorifying war. And so I was very angry about that parade. I was living in Washington at the time, and I refused to look at it. And instead, I went for a long walk around the Capitol. And I was asking myself, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I came to the idea that I wanted to be a writer. And then I realized, well, I've always been a writer because I'm a lawyer, and I've been writing for other people all of my life, including in my business career, and persuading people to invest in me and that various things. And so I decided I was going to write a novel. And I had written an article by Michael Crichton of Jurassic Park fame in the Wall Street Journal. And he had said, well, the way to write a novel is to ask a question and then answer it. And so obviously he asked the question, what happens if you bring dinosaurs back to life? But in 1962, my family had a live-in maid, a Japanese maid. And so I was 15 and this maid was 23, and she lived in our house with us. And so one time I said to my father, why is Michiko living here? What's happening? And my father's answer was, well, young Japanese women come to Tokyo to earn their dowry, quote unquote. Now, I don't know if that's an accurate thing to say or not, but that's what my father said to me. So all he said was, young Japanese women come to Tokyo to earn their dowry. And I don't really know of a dowry system in Japan per se, but that was what my father's analysis was at that time. And so on this walk that I was taking around the American Capitol, that statement came back to me. And I said, well, okay, so what if that woman comes to Tokyo to earn her dowry at a very young age, and then over her lifetime becomes the first prime minister of Japan? How might that have happened? And what would that life be like? And so that is the story of Mako. So it's the story of this young woman, age 15, who was sold to pay a debt and by her father. And she is taken by organized crime in Japan, and then her experiences after that are quite unique. But she ultimately does become the first woman prime minister of Japan. And so that's her story from age 15 to age 75. But I didn't know what to do with this active imagination experience. That's what it was that I was going through at that time. I didn't even have a name for it at the time. I wrote it at the same time I had been reading a book, which I also keep in reach, by a Jungian analyst named Nicola Estes, and it's called Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype. And in this book, Dr. Estes has, in one story called Vasilisa the Wise, and it begins on page, I think it's on page 74 of this book. At the end of a story called Vasilisa the Wise, she gives the 9 steps that a woman goes through to realize her intuition and to realize her individuation. And I had read that book recently, and so I decided to model my story on Dr. Estes's 9 steps. And so I literally, although you wouldn't recognize it necessarily because I didn't mention Dr. Estes in the book, but I used that template as the basis of the story. And so many women have read the book now and like it. My wife refused to read it until I had 10 other women read it, to her great credit. And so I had to show it to other women in order to get my wife to read it. And when she did read it, she liked it. My mother liked it. Most women seem to resonate with it because it does represent a feminine story of individuation, but it's also the individuation of my anima. At least that's my perspective on it. But because it contained certain erotica, and I was in the middle of my business career at that time, I put it in my drawer for 16 years. And only in 2014, I made a commitment to myself to publish it. And I have published it, but only in Kindle form. So it is available on Amazon. And it's also, by the way, available for free on our Dropbox. So if anybody wants to write to skip.conover@gmail.com, you can get access to all the materials that I've been using over the last 4 years to teach my class. And one of the things I've put in there is electronic copies of all 4 of the books that I've published. And so you don't have to buy it from Amazon if you're interested in learning about it. And so you need to write to skip.conover@gmail.com. I'll just put it in the chat, and I will give you access to that book. And so I probably should quit at this point for today, since I have another important session in a few hours. But anyway, that's access to our general Dropbox, where you can find this book if you're interested in looking at it. And anyway, any further comments or questions before I wrap up for today? Okay, so I've literally read, I don't know if I can show you from here, to hear in this essay. So this is 6 weeks dedicated to this essay so far. And so I will continue this next week at the same hour, 8 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And I will, next week, the topic is soul and the experience of God. That's the first topic that's there. And we'll talk about that next week. And I hope this has been useful to you. The purpose is to make something that's fairly interesting, accessible to someone who doesn't have English as a first language and also may not have access to our YouTube playback. So that's why I've been doing it at this hour, so that it can be listened to live. And I hope it's useful to you. It's nice to see you hanging in there. It's nice to see Vivian and Yagu-san and Christian staying for the entire 2 hours. It's quite interesting.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, and I hope we see you later.
Yeah, so I will be back on in 3 hours with Dr. Murray Stein, and we'll be talking about BTS, among other things. So it'll be very exciting. There'll be a lot more people here then. So
boy bands, thank you.
So see you later, and
See you later.
see you next week. Bye bye.